In the small town of Maplewood, revenge was a common theme. It was said that if someone wronged you, the only way to make things right was to get even. And that's exactly what Lily decided to do. Lily had always been a shy girl. She had long brown hair that she kept tied back in a ponytail, and bright green eyes that shone with kindness. But one day, Lily's life changed forever. She was walking home from school when she saw a group of boys picking on a younger kid. Lily tried to intervene, but the boys turned on her, pushing her down and laughing at her. From that day on, Lily was different. She became withdrawn and angry, plotting her revenge against those boys. And when she found out that one of them had a prized possession, a vintage motorcycle, she knew exactly what she had to do. Late one night, Lily snuck into the boys' garage and stole the motorcycle. She drove it to an abandoned lot and set it on fire, watching as the flames engulfed the bike. For Lily, it was a small victory, a way to show those boys that they couldn't push her around. But revenge never comes without consequences. The next day, Lily's house was vandalized, her windows smashed and her car keyed. And as she walked to school, she realized that she had become just like those boys, a bully seeking vengeance. In the end, Lily realized that revenge wasn't worth it. She had lost a part of herself in her quest for justice, and she knew that the cycle of violence would only continue. And so she made a promise to herself, to be kind, even in the face of cruelty, and to never seek revenge again. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, Jake knew that violence was a part of life. He had seen his fair share of fights, and he knew that sometimes, the only way to survive was to fight back. But when Jake's best friend was attacked by a rival gang, he knew that he had to do something, even if it meant taking matters into his own hands. Jake and his friends decided to seek revenge, targeting the leader of the rival gang. They cornered him in an alleyway and beat him mercilessly, leaving him with a broken nose and several missing teeth. For Jake, it was a small victory, a way to show the other gang that they couldn't mess with his crew. But the consequences of their actions were far-reaching. The rival gang vowed revenge, and soon, Jake's friends were being attacked at every turn. It seemed like the violence would never end, and Jake knew that they had made a grave mistake. In the end, Jake realized that revenge wasn't worth it. The violence had only escalated, and he knew that it would never truly end until someone put an end to it. And so he made a decision, to walk away from the gang life and to make a better future for himself. Years later, Jake had become a successful businessman, far removed from the violence of his past. But he never forgot the lessons he learned, that revenge only leads to more pain, and that the only way to break the cycle of violence is to choose kindness instead. Growing up in a small village in rural India, Jaya had always been told that justice meant an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It was a common belief in her community that if someone wronged you, it was your duty to seek retribution. And so when Jaya's father was killed in a car accident caused by a reckless driver, she knew exactly what she had to do. Jaya was determined to seek revenge against the driver who had taken her father's life. She spent months tracking him down, learning everything she could about his habits and routines. And when she finally found him, she confronted him in the middle of the street, demanding that he pay for what he had done. The driver, a young man named Raj, was shocked and confused by Jaya's anger. He explained that the accident had been a terrible mistake, that he had been distracted by a phone call and had lost control of his car. He begged for forgiveness, but Jaya was unrelenting. She demanded that he suffer as she had suffered, that he lose something dear to him, just as she had lost her father. In the end, Jaya's revenge came at a great cost. She had become so consumed with anger and bitterness that she had lost sight of the person she truly was. Her friends and family no longer recognized her, and even Jaya herself felt like a stranger in her own skin. But as she watched Raj suffer the same pain she had felt, Jaya began to realize that revenge wasn't the answer. The cycle of violence would only continue unless someone was willing to break it. And so she made a decision, to forgive Raj and to move on with her life. It wasn't easy, but in the end, Jaya found peace, and the knowledge that true justice meant choosing compassion over revenge. In the bustling city of New York, Maria had always been taught to stand up for herself. She was a strong, independent woman who didn't take kindly to bullies or abusers. And so when her ex-boyfriend, Max, showed up at her apartment one night, drunk and angry, Maria knew that she had to defend herself. Max had always been possessive and controlling, and when Maria finally ended their relationship, he didn't take it well. He had been stalking her for weeks, leaving threatening messages and even following her home from work. And now, as he stood in her living room, screaming at her and throwing things, Maria knew that she had to act fast. She grabbed a nearby vase and swung it at Max's head, striking him squarely in the eye. Max fell to the ground, howling in pain, and Maria fled the apartment, calling the police as she ran. In the days that followed, Maria couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that weighed on her heart. She had always prided herself on being a strong, independent woman, but had she gone too far this time? Had she become just like the abuser she had tried to escape? But as the weeks turned into months, Maria began to see that her actions had been justified. Max was arrested and charged with stalking and assault, and Maria was finally able to move on with her life. She realized that sometimes, justice meant fighting back, that sometimes, the only way to protect yourself was to strike first. In the end, Maria learned that there was no shame in defending yourself, that sometimes, an eye for an eye was the only way to make things right. And she knew that no matter what happened in the future, she would always be strong enough to stand up for herself. As a dentist, Dr. Emily had always prided herself on being able to help her patients in any way she could. She had a reputation as one of the best dentists in town, and people came from all over to see her. But one day, a patient came in who was different from the others. His name was Tom, and he had a reputation as a notorious gangster. Tom had been in a bar fight the night before and had lost a tooth, and he needed Dr. Emily to replace it. At first, Dr. Emily was hesitant to treat Tom. She had heard the rumors about his criminal activities and didn't want to get involved. But Tom was insistent, and eventually, she agreed to help him. As she worked on Tom's tooth, Dr. Emily found herself talking to him about his life. She learned that he had grown up in poverty, that he had turned to crime as a way to survive. And as she listened to his story, Dr. Emily began to see Tom as a human being, not just a criminal. When Tom's tooth was finally fixed, he thanked Dr. Emily and left. But a few days later, he returned to her office with a proposition. He wanted to start a program to help kids in the neighborhood stay out of trouble, to give them a better life than he had had. Dr. Emily was skeptical at first, but as Tom explained his plan, she began to see that it could work. Together, they started a community center where kids could go after school to get help with their homework, learn new skills, and stay out of trouble. In the end, Dr. Emily realized that sometimes, justice didn't mean punishment, that sometimes, it meant giving people a chance to do better, and she knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, she would always be there to help Tom and the kids in their community. Sophie had always been the type of person who believed in karma, that what goes around comes around. And so when her boyfriend cheated on her with her best friend, Sophie knew that she had to make him pay. She spent weeks plotting her revenge, determined to make him feel the same pain she had felt. And when the day finally came, she struck, destroying his car with a baseball bat and leaving him a note that simply said, "An eye for an eye." At first, Sophie felt a sense of satisfaction. She had gotten her revenge, and now her ex-boyfriend would know how it felt to be hurt. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to see that her actions had only made things worse. Her ex-boyfriend was angry and hurt, and he began spreading rumors about her around town. Sophie's friends started avoiding her, and she found herself feeling more alone than ever. In the end, Sophie realized that revenge had been a mistake, that sometimes, the best way to get justice was to let it go. She reached out to her ex-boyfriend and apologized for what she had done, and though they never got back together, they were able to find a way to coexist peacefully. Sophie learned that sometimes, an eye for an eye only leaves everyone blind, and that the true path to justice was forgiveness and compassion. And she knew that from now on, she would always try to choose that path, no matter how difficult it might be. John was a successful businessman who had it all, the big house, the fancy cars, and the beautiful wife. But one day, everything changed. John came home to find his wife in bed with another man. In a fit of rage, he attacked the man and ended up blinding him in one eye. John was arrested and sent to prison for assault, but he felt no remorse. He believed that he had done the right thing, that he had given the man what he deserved. But while in prison, John's perspective began to shift. He met other inmates who had been victims of violent crimes, and he saw the toll that revenge had taken on them. He realized that his actions had only perpetuated a cycle of violence and that true justice was about more than just retribution. When John was released from prison, he decided to turn his life around. He started volunteering at a community center, helping at-risk youth and teaching them the value of forgiveness and compassion. He also reached out to the man he had blinded, and together they worked to make amends. Over time, John realized that his desire for revenge had blinded him to the truth, that justice was not about making others suffer but about finding a way to heal and move forward. He knew that he could never undo the harm he had caused, but he was determined to do everything he could to make things right. In the end, John learned that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was not the answer, that true justice came from understanding, empathy, and forgiveness. And he knew that he would spend the rest of his life striving to live up to those ideals. Caitlin had always been a fighter. Growing up, she had been bullied and harassed by her classmates for being different, and she had learned to fight back, both physically and emotionally. By the time she was an adult, she had built up a tough exterior that kept people at bay. But one day, while walking home from work, Caitlin was attacked by a group of men. They beat her badly, leaving her with a broken tooth and a black eye. When she reported the attack to the police, they told her that they couldn't do anything without more evidence. Feeling angry and helpless, Caitlin decided to take matters into her own hands. She began training in mixed martial arts, determined to never be a victim again. And when she saw one of her attackers at a local bar, she confronted him. The confrontation turned violent, and Caitlin ended up breaking the man's nose. As he lay on the ground, writhing in pain, Caitlin whispered to him, "A tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye." For a moment, Caitlin felt a sense of satisfaction. She had gotten her revenge, and the man would think twice before attacking anyone else. But as she walked away, she realized that she had become the very thing she had fought against, a bully, using violence to get what she wanted. Over the next few weeks, Caitlin did some soul searching. She talked to friends and family, and she began to see that her need for revenge had blinded her to the truth, that justice was not about hurting others but about finding a way to heal and move forward. In the end, Caitlin realized that she didn't want to be a fighter anymore, that she wanted to use her strength to help others instead of hurting them. She became a mentor to young girls who had experienced bullying, teaching them how to defend themselves without resorting to violence. And while Caitlin would always carry the scars of her past, she knew that she had the power to turn them into something positive, to use her experience to make the world a better place. Sarah had always been a kind and gentle person. She believed in treating others with compassion and respect, even when they didn't deserve it. But when her father was murdered in a senseless act of violence, everything changed. Sarah was consumed with rage and grief. She couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt her father, a man who had devoted his life to helping others. She wanted justice, and she wanted it now. When the police failed to make an arrest, Sarah took matters into her own hands. She began investigating her father's death, spending countless hours poring over police reports and witness statements. And when she finally identified the man who had killed her father, she made a plan. Late one night, Sarah crept into the man's house, armed with a knife. She cornered him in his bedroom, ready to make him pay for what he had done. But as she raised the knife, something inside her snapped. In that moment, Sarah realized that revenge would never bring her father back. It would only create more pain and suffering, for herself and for the man she was about to kill. She dropped the knife and fled the house. Over the next few weeks, Sarah struggled to come to terms with what had happened. She couldn't shake the feeling of anger and despair that had taken hold of her since her father's death. But slowly, she began to see that there was another way, a way to honor her father's memory and bring about true justice. Sarah started a foundation in her father's name, dedicated to helping victims of violence and their families. She worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the impact of violence on communities and to promote nonviolent conflict resolution. Through her work, Sarah found a sense of purpose and meaning that she had never felt before. She knew that she could never forget what had happened to her father, but she also knew that she could use her experience to make the world a better place, one small act of kindness at a time. Mark had always been a stickler for rules. He believed that there was a right way to do things, and a wrong way. So when he discovered that his business partner had been stealing money from their company, he was outraged. Mark confronted his partner, demanding that he return the stolen funds and resign from the company. But his partner refused, insisting that he had done nothing wrong. Enraged, Mark decided to take matters into his own hands. He filed a lawsuit against his partner, seeking to recover the stolen funds and seeking damages for breach of trust. But the legal process was slow and frustrating, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that his partner was getting away with something. One day, while walking home from work, Mark spotted his partner walking down the street. Without thinking, he lunged at him, punching him in the face. The blow knocked out one of his partner's teeth, leaving him bloodied and bruised. For a moment, Mark felt a sense of satisfaction. He had gotten his revenge, and his partner would think twice before stealing from anyone again. But as he walked away, he realized that he had become the very thing he had fought against, a bully, using violence to get what he wanted. Over the next few weeks, Mark did some soul-searching. He talked to friends and family, and he began to see that his need for revenge had blinded him to the truth. That justice was not about hurting others but about finding a way to heal and move forward. In the end, Mark realized that he didn't want to be a rule follower anymore, that he wanted to use his passion for justice to help others instead of hurting them. He became a mentor to young entrepreneurs, teaching them how to build businesses that were based on honesty and integrity. And while Mark would always carry the guilt of what he had done, he knew that he had the power to turn it into something positive, to use his experience to make the world a better place. Jessica had always been the quiet type. She was content to stay in the background, observing the world around her and doing her best to avoid conflict. But when her sister was assaulted by her ex-boyfriend, everything changed. Jessica was shocked and horrified by what had happened to her sister. She couldn't understand how someone could be so cruel and callous. And when she learned that the man responsible had been released on bail pending his trial, she was outraged. Determined to get justice for her sister, Jessica decided to take matters into her own hands. She began researching the man's past, and soon discovered that he had a history of violent behavior. She also learned that he had a weakness for expensive cars. With this knowledge in hand, Jessica hatched a plan. She posed as a wealthy car buyer, and arranged to meet the man at a luxury car dealership. When they met, she charmed him with her wit and beauty, and he was soon smitten. Over the next few weeks, Jessica played a dangerous game, leading the man on and gaining his trust. She even slept with him, feigning interest in his criminal enterprises. And when she finally had enough evidence to put him away for good, she struck. Jessica lured the man to a deserted parking lot, promising to give him a cut of a fake heist she had cooked up. But when he arrived, he found himself surrounded by police, who had been tipped off by Jessica. He was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Jessica had done it. She had gotten justice for her sister. But as she walked away from the courthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had become so obsessed with revenge that she had lost sight of what was really important, her own integrity. Over the next few months, Jessica struggled to come to terms with what she had done. She realized that she had become just like the man she had hated, using deceit and manipulation to get what she wanted. And while she had achieved her goal, she had done it at a cost to her own sense of self. In the end, Jessica decided to turn her life around. She quit her job and joined a nonprofit organization that helped victims of domestic violence. And while she would always carry the guilt of what she had done, she knew that she could use her experience to help others, to teach them that revenge was not the answer, but that justice was still possible through compassion and determination. Julia had always been a fiery and passionate person. She was quick to anger and slow to forgive, and she had a fierce sense of justice that drove her to stand up for what she believed in. So when she learned that her best friend had been cheated on by her husband, she was furious. Julia's friend was devastated by the betrayal, and she turned to Julia for support. But as Julia watched her friend struggle with the pain of infidelity, she couldn't help but feel a sense of rage building inside her. She wanted to make the man who had hurt her friend suffer, to give him a taste of his own medicine. And so Julia hatched a plan. She befriended the man, gaining his trust and playing on his guilt. She convinced him to go out to dinner with her, and she drugged his drink. When he was unconscious, she took him to a motel room and tied him up. Over the next few days, Julia subjected the man to a series of tortures, both physical and emotional. She forced him to watch as she destroyed his possessions, and she taunted him with stories of how he had hurt her friend. She even went so far as to cheat on him with another man, just to make him feel the pain of betrayal. But as the days went on, Julia began to feel a sense of emptiness. She had gotten her revenge, but at what cost? She had become a monster, consumed by her own anger and bitterness. And as she looked at the man lying bound and broken before her, she realized that she had lost sight of what was really important, the people she loved. In the end, Julia released the man and turned herself into the police. She was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison for kidnapping and torture. But during her time in prison, she found a new purpose: to help others who had been consumed by their own anger and bitterness. She became a mentor to young women, teaching them how to find peace and forgiveness in a world that was often cruel and unjust. And while Julia would always carry the guilt of what she had done, she knew that she had the power to turn it into something positive, to use her experience to make the world a better place, one person at a time. When Sarah's husband was killed in a hit-and-run accident, she was consumed by grief and anger. The driver had never been caught, and Sarah felt a sense of injustice that haunted her every waking moment. She couldn't rest until the person responsible was brought to justice. For years, Sarah searched for any clue that could lead her to the killer. She even hired private detectives and visited psychics, hoping for a breakthrough. But nothing ever came of it. One day, Sarah was approached by a mysterious woman who claimed to have information about the hit-and-run driver. She told Sarah that the man responsible was a powerful businessman who had bribed the police to cover up the crime. She offered to help Sarah bring the man to justice, but at a steep price. The woman demanded that Sarah pay her $1 million for the information. Sarah was desperate for closure, so she agreed to the deal. With the woman's help, Sarah was able to gather evidence that led to the businessman's arrest. He was charged with vehicular manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. But as time passed, Sarah began to regret her decision. She had spent her life savings on revenge, and she had become consumed by the pursuit of justice. She had lost sight of what was really important, her own well-being and the memory of her husband. In the end, Sarah realized that the price of revenge was too high. She decided to sell her house and donate the money to a charity that helped victims of hit-and-run accidents. And while she would never forget the pain of losing her husband, she knew that she could find peace by helping others who were going through the same thing. Sarah learned that revenge was not the answer. It only brought temporary satisfaction, but it never truly healed the pain. True healing could only come through forgiveness and compassion. Jason had always been a troublemaker. He had a quick temper and a penchant for violence, and he had been in and out of juvenile detention centers since he was 13. But when he turned 18, he thought he was ready to leave his old life behind and start fresh. He moved to a new city, got a job at a construction site, and tried to keep his head down. But one day, while he was on his lunch break, he got into a fight with a coworker. The other man had insulted Jason's mother, and Jason flew into a rage. He punched the man in the face, breaking several of his teeth. The coworker pressed charges, and Jason was sentenced to 6 months in jail. But he wasn't ready to accept responsibility for his actions. He blamed the other man for provoking him, and he felt a burning desire for revenge. After he was released from jail, Jason began plotting his revenge. He knew where the other man lived, and he began stalking him, waiting for the perfect opportunity. And one day, he saw his chance. The other man was walking home from a bar, drunk and vulnerable. Jason ambushed him, beating him mercilessly and knocking out several of his teeth. As he walked away from the scene of the crime, Jason felt a sense of satisfaction. He had finally gotten his revenge, and he had shown the other man who was boss. But as he looked back at the bloodied and broken man lying on the ground, he realized that he had become a monster. Jason had let his anger and desire for revenge consume him, and he had lost sight of what was really important, his own humanity. He knew that he couldn't keep living like this, so he turned himself into the police and confessed to the assault. In jail, Jason began to reflect on his actions. He realized that revenge had only brought him temporary satisfaction, but it had left him with a lifetime of regret and guilt. He knew that he had to find a better way to deal with his anger and frustration, and he began taking classes in anger management and therapy. And while Jason would never be able to undo the harm he had caused, he knew that he had the power to change his future. He made a vow to never let his anger get the best of him again, and he worked hard to become a better person. In the end, Jason learned that revenge was never the answer. It only led to pain and suffering for everyone involved. It started with petty pranks and insults, but soon escalated into more serious offenses. The Petersons vandalized the Johnsons' property, and the Johnsons retaliated by stealing the Petersons' livestock. The feud seemed to have no end in sight. One day, the Johnsons took it too far. They burned down the Petersons' barn, killing several of their animals. The Petersons were devastated, and they vowed to take revenge. They waited for the perfect opportunity, and one night they struck. They snuck onto the Johnsons' property and set fire to their house, destroying everything the family owned. The Johnsons were furious, and they retaliated by burning down the Petersons' house. And so it continued, each family seeking revenge for the other's actions, until the cycle of violence had consumed them both. It wasn't until years later, when the two families had lost everything and were forced to live in poverty, that they realized the senselessness of their actions. They had lost sight of what was really important, their families and their own well-being. They had been consumed by their desire for revenge, and it had left them with nothing but ashes. In the end, the Petersons and the Johnsons learned that the cycle of revenge only leads to pain and suffering. It's a never-ending spiral that destroys everything in its path. They made a vow to never let their feud escalate again, and they worked hard to rebuild their lives and find a way to coexist peacefully. And while they could never undo the damage they had caused, they knew that they had the power to create a better future for themselves and their families. Sarah had always been a fighter. She had grown up in a tough neighborhood, and she had learned to defend herself from a young age. But when she was 15, she was jumped by a group of girls on her way home from school. They beat her mercilessly, leaving her with a broken nose and several bruises. Sarah was humiliated and angry. She knew who the girls were, and she wanted revenge. She spent the next few months planning her retaliation. She would show them that she wasn't someone to be messed with. One day, she saw one of the girls walking home from school. Sarah followed her, waiting for the perfect opportunity. When the girl was alone in an alley, Sarah attacked her, beating her with a tire iron until she was unconscious. Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction as she walked away from the scene of the crime. She had shown the other girl that she wasn't someone to be messed with, and she had gotten her revenge. But the feeling of satisfaction was short-lived. Sarah was consumed by guilt and regret. She realized that what she had done was wrong, and that she had become just like the people who had hurt her in the first place. She knew that she had to make things right. She turned herself into the police and confessed to the assault. She knew that she would face consequences for her actions, but she also knew that it was the right thing to do. In the end, Sarah learned that revenge only leads to more pain and suffering. It's a never-ending cycle that only causes more harm. She made a vow to never let her anger and desire for revenge consume her again, and she worked hard to become a better person. She learned to forgive those who had hurt her and to let go of her anger. And while she couldn't undo the harm she had caused, she knew that she had the power to create a better future for herself and those around her. Jacob had always been a competitive athlete. He had played football in high school and had gone on to play in college. But when he was 22, he was involved in a freak accident on the field. He collided with another player and fell awkwardly, breaking several of his teeth. The injury was devastating for Jacob. It meant that he couldn't play football anymore, and it left him with a permanent reminder of the accident. He was angry and resentful, and he wanted revenge on the player who had caused his injury. He spent months researching the other player, trying to find out everything he could about him. He learned that the player was a star athlete at a rival college, and that he was known for his aggressive playing style. Jacob made a plan. He would travel to the other player's college and confront him. He would make him pay for what he had done. When Jacob arrived on campus, he found the player on the football field, practicing with his team. Jacob approached him, and before the player could even react, Jacob punched him in the face, knocking him to the ground. The player was stunned and disoriented. Jacob kicked him in the stomach and continued to beat him, screaming insults and threats. But as he looked down at the player, Jacob suddenly realized the futility of his actions. He had become consumed by his anger and his desire for revenge, and it had led him to commit a violent and senseless act. He stopped his attack and walked away, ashamed of what he had done. He knew that he would face consequences for his actions, but he also knew that he had to make things right. In the end, Jacob learned that revenge only leads to more pain and suffering. It's a never-ending cycle that only causes more harm. He made a vow to never let his anger and desire for revenge consume him again, and he worked hard to become a better person. He learned to forgive those who had hurt him and to let go of his anger. And while he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, he knew that he had the power to create a better future for himself and those around him. When Ryan was 25, he lost his little sister to a drunk driver. The driver had been speeding and had run a red light, hitting her car and killing her instantly. Ryan was devastated by the loss of his sister and furious at the driver who had taken her life. The driver, a man named Mike, was arrested and charged with vehicular manslaughter. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Ryan wasn't satisfied. He felt that Mike's punishment wasn't enough. He wanted revenge. He spent the next 5 years planning his retaliation. He learned everything he could about Mike, including where he would be living after he was released from prison. On the day of Mike's release, Ryan was waiting for him outside the prison gates. He followed Mike to his new apartment and waited for the perfect opportunity. When Mike was alone, Ryan attacked him, beating him with a metal rod until he was unconscious. Ryan felt a sense of satisfaction as he walked away from the scene of the crime. He had shown Mike that he wasn't someone to be messed with, and he had gotten his revenge. But the feeling of satisfaction was short-lived. Ryan was consumed by guilt and regret. He realized that what he had done was wrong, and that he had become just like the person who had taken his sister's life. He knew that he had to make things right. He turned himself into the police and confessed to the assault. He knew that he would face consequences for his actions, but he also knew that it was the right thing to do. In the end, Ryan learned that revenge only leads to more pain and suffering. It's a never-ending cycle that only causes more harm. He made a vow to never let his anger and desire for revenge consume him again, and he worked hard to become a better person. He learned to forgive those who had hurt him and to let go of his anger. And while he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, he knew that he had the power to create a better future for himself and those around him. Samantha had always been a kind and caring person. She was always willing to lend a helping hand to anyone who needed it. But when her brother was brutally murdered, everything changed. Samantha was consumed by anger and grief. She wanted revenge on the person who had taken her brother's life. She spent months researching the case, trying to find any clues that might lead her to the killer. One day, Samantha received a call from a private investigator she had hired. He had found the killer and had even managed to track him down to a small town in the middle of nowhere. Samantha packed a bag and drove to the town. She found the killer's house and waited outside, watching and waiting for the perfect opportunity. That opportunity came one night when the killer was out for a walk. Samantha followed him into the woods and waited until he was alone. Then, she attacked him with a knife, stabbing him repeatedly until he was dead. Samantha felt a sense of satisfaction as she walked away from the scene of the crime. She had gotten her revenge, and she felt that justice had been served. But the feeling of satisfaction was short-lived. Samantha was consumed by guilt and regret. She realized that what she had done was wrong, and that she had become just like the person who had taken her brother's life. She knew that she had to make things right. She turned herself into the police and confessed to the murder. She knew that she would face consequences for her actions, but she also knew that it was the right thing to do. In the end, Samantha learned that revenge only leads to more pain and suffering. It's a never-ending cycle that only causes more harm. She made a vow to never let her anger and desire for revenge consume her again, and she worked hard to become a better person. She learned to forgive those who had hurt her and to let go of her anger. And while she couldn't undo the harm she had caused, she knew that she had the power to create a better future for herself and those around her. Oliver had always been a bully. He enjoyed picking on people, especially those who were weaker than him. He had no regard for anyone else's feelings, and he never thought about the consequences of his actions. One day, Oliver picked on the wrong person. He targeted a shy and quiet boy named Alex, who had always been a target for bullies like Oliver. Oliver didn't know it, but Alex had been taking self-defense classes for months. He had learned how to defend himself against attackers like Oliver. When Oliver cornered Alex in the schoolyard, Alex fought back. He punched Oliver in the face, knocking out one of his teeth. Oliver was humiliated. He couldn't believe that someone like Alex had managed to get the better of him. He knew that he had to do something to get revenge. Over the next few weeks, Oliver plotted his retaliation. He waited until Alex was alone and attacked him, punching him in the face and knocking out one of his teeth. But Oliver's actions didn't go unnoticed. The school principal found out about the fight and suspended both boys. He called in their parents and told them what had happened. Oliver's parents were shocked and disappointed by their son's behavior. They knew that he had a history of bullying, but they had never realized how serious the problem was. They made a decision to get Oliver the help he needed. They enrolled him in anger management classes and made sure that he apologized to Alex for what he had done. Over time, Oliver learned to control his anger and to treat others with kindness and respect. He realized that his actions had consequences, and that he needed to take responsibility for them. In the end, Oliver and Alex were able to make peace with each other. They even became friends, and Oliver learned that being kind to others was much more rewarding than being a bully. Sarah and Katie had been best friends since they were in kindergarten. They did everything together, from playing dress-up to going on adventures in the woods behind their houses. But as they grew older, their friendship began to change. Sarah became jealous of Katie's popularity and started to exclude her from their group of friends. She would make fun of Katie's clothes and criticize her for her interests. Katie tried to talk to Sarah about how she was feeling, but Sarah refused to listen. She continued to bully and belittle Katie, making her feel worthless and alone. One day, Katie had enough. She decided to fight back. She started to spread rumors about Sarah and made fun of her in front of their friends. She even punched Sarah in the face, knocking out one of her teeth. Sarah was shocked and humiliated. She couldn't believe that her best friend had turned on her like this. She knew that she had to do something to get revenge. Over the next few weeks, Sarah plotted her retaliation. She waited until Katie was alone and attacked her, hitting her in the eye and leaving her with a black eye. But Sarah's actions didn't go unnoticed. The school principal found out about the fight and suspended both girls. He called in their parents and told them what had happened. Sarah and Katie's parents were devastated. They couldn't believe that their daughters had been fighting like this. They knew that they needed to do something to help them. They decided to take a different approach. They enrolled the girls in counseling sessions and encouraged them to talk about their feelings. They also made sure that they apologized to each other for what they had done. Over time, Sarah and Katie were able to work through their issues and rebuild their friendship. They learned that their actions had consequences and that they needed to treat each other with kindness and respect. In the end, Sarah and Katie realized that revenge only leads to more pain and suffering. They learned that forgiveness and understanding are much more rewarding than anger and hatred. And while they couldn't undo the harm they had caused each other, they knew they had the power to create a better future for themselves and those around them. John had always been a hard worker. He had a successful career and had earned the respect of his colleagues and clients. He was also a devoted husband and father, always putting his family first. But one day, John's life was turned upside down. He was driving home from work when another car ran a red light and crashed into him. John was injured and had to be rushed to the hospital. After the accident, John found out that the other driver was drunk. He was angry and frustrated that someone could be so reckless and put others' lives at risk. John's injuries were severe, and he had to undergo multiple surgeries to recover. He couldn't work and had to rely on his savings to support his family. He was in a lot of pain and felt like his life had been stolen from him. John couldn't let go of his anger and frustration. He wanted the other driver to pay for what he had done. He decided to sue him for damages and made it his mission to make sure that he was punished for his actions. The court case dragged on for months, and John was consumed by his desire for revenge. He couldn't sleep or eat, and his relationships with his family and friends suffered. But as the trial drew near, John started to realize that his anger was only hurting him. He saw the toll it was taking on his health and his relationships, and he knew that he needed to let it go. In the end, John decided to drop the lawsuit and focus on his recovery. He realized that revenge wasn't worth sacrificing his well-being and his relationships. John's decision to let go of his anger was a turning point in his life. He was able to heal and move forward, and he became an advocate for forgiveness and understanding. He learned that sometimes the best revenge is to let go of the past and focus on creating a better future. Jake had always been a bit of a troublemaker. He had a quick temper and a tendency to lash out at those around him. His parents had tried to discipline him, but nothing seemed to work. One day, Jake got into a fight with a classmate at school. He punched the boy in the face, knocking out one of his teeth. The school principal called Jake's parents and told them what had happened. They were furious and embarrassed by their son's behavior. They knew that they needed to do something to teach him a lesson. Jake's parents decided to take a unique approach. They made him work at a dental clinic for a month to pay for the boy's tooth to be fixed. Jake was resistant at first, but he soon realized the gravity of his actions and the impact they had on others. During his time at the dental clinic, Jake learned about the importance of dental hygiene and the various procedures that were used to treat patients. He saw firsthand the pain and discomfort that people experienced when they had dental problems. Jake also spent time with the boy whose tooth he had knocked out. He apologized for what he had done and promised to never let his anger get the best of him again. The boy forgave him, and they became friends. By the end of his time at the dental clinic, Jake was a changed person. He had learned the importance of taking responsibility for his actions and the impact they had on others. He had also gained a new appreciation for the value of hard work and empathy. Jake's experience at the dental clinic had a profound impact on his life. He went on to become a successful dentist and an advocate for teaching children about the importance of taking responsibility for their actions. He learned that sometimes, the best way to teach a lesson is to let someone experience the consequences of their actions firsthand. Samantha was a young woman who had always lived a happy life. She had a loving family, good friends, and a promising career. But all of that changed when she was the victim of a violent crime. One night, Samantha was walking home from work when she was attacked by a mob. He beat her and left her for dead. Samantha was rushed to the hospital, where she underwent multiple surgeries to recover from her injuries. Samantha was left traumatized by the attack. She was scared to leave her house and couldn't sleep without nightmares. She was angry and wanted the person who had hurt her to pay for what he had done. The police caught the man who had attacked Samantha, and he was brought to trial. Samantha was determined to see justice served, and she testified against him. During the trial, Samantha saw the man who had hurt her for the first time since the attack. She felt a surge of anger and wanted to lash out at him. But as she looked at him, she saw the fear and desperation in his eyes. She realized that he was a broken man who had made a terrible mistake. In the end, the man was found guilty and sentenced to prison. But Samantha didn't feel satisfied with the verdict. She realized that revenge wasn't going to heal her wounds or make her feel better. She knew that she needed to find a way to forgive the man and move on with her life. Samantha started therapy and worked through her trauma. She learned to forgive the man who had hurt her and found a way to let go of her anger. She also started a support group for other victims of violent crimes, and she became an advocate for restorative justice. Samantha's experience taught her that sometimes the best revenge is forgiveness. She learned that holding on to anger and seeking revenge only perpetuates the cycle of violence. By letting go of her anger and finding a way to forgive, she was able to heal and move forward with her life. Jenna had always been a competitive person. She loved to win, and she would do anything to come out on top. It was this drive that led her to become a successful lawyer. She was known for her aggressive tactics in the courtroom, and she had a reputation for never backing down. One day, Jenna was working on a case that hit close to home. Her sister had been the victim of a hit-and-run accident, and the driver had never been caught. Jenna was determined to find justice for her sister, and she poured all of her energy into the case. As the trial approached, Jenna became increasingly obsessed with winning. She was convinced that the defendant was guilty and that she had to win the case at all costs. During the trial, Jenna discovered that the defendant had a wife and 2 young children. She didn't care. She was so focused on winning that she was willing to destroy the defendant's life to get what she wanted. In the end, Jenna won the case. The defendant was found guilty and sentenced to prison. Jenna felt a sense of triumph, but it was short-lived. She soon realized that her obsession with winning had come at a great cost. Jenna's sister had been seeking closure, but instead, she was left feeling empty. Jenna's aggressive tactics had only caused more pain and suffering for the defendant's family. Jenna had become the very thing she hated, a person who would do anything to win. Jenna was left with a sense of guilt and regret. She realized that she had lost sight of what was truly important in life. She had been so focused on winning that she had forgotten the value of compassion and empathy. Jenna decided to change her ways. She left her high-powered law firm and started working for a nonprofit organization that helped victims of violent crimes. She used her skills as a lawyer to help those in need, and she found a sense of fulfillment in helping others. Jenna's experience taught her that sometimes the best way to win is to show compassion and empathy. She learned that there is more to life than winning at all costs and that true success comes from helping others. Daniel had always been a successful businessman. He had a thriving company that was making him millions of dollars. He was well respected in his industry, and he was known for his sharp negotiating skills. But all of that changed when he crossed paths with a ruthless competitor. Daniel's company had been doing well, but then a new competitor entered the market. The competitor was willing to do anything to win, including using underhanded tactics to steal Daniel's clients. At first, Daniel tried to ignore the competitor. He believed that his company's reputation would speak for itself. But the competitor's tactics were working, and Daniel was losing clients left and right. Daniel became angry and bitter. He felt like he had been wronged, and he wanted revenge. He decided to fight fire with fire and started using underhanded tactics to try and win back his clients. The situation escalated, and soon Daniel and his competitor were engaged in a full-blown corporate war. They were both spending millions of dollars on advertising campaigns and trying to one-up each other at every turn. The situation came to a head when the competitor launched a vicious smear campaign against Daniel's company. The campaign was so successful that Daniel's company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Daniel was devastated. He had spent years building his company, and now it was all falling apart. He felt like he had no choice but to retaliate. Daniel launched a counter-campaign against the competitor. He spent all of his remaining money on a massive advertising campaign that was designed to destroy the competitor's reputation. In the end, both companies were destroyed. Daniel had won the battle, but he had lost the war. He was left with nothing but bitterness and regret. Daniel realized that he had been consumed by his desire for revenge. He had lost sight of what was truly important in life, and he had destroyed everything he had worked so hard to build. Daniel decided to start over. He sold his possessions and used the money to start a new company, one that was focused on helping others. He found a sense of fulfillment in using his skills to make a positive difference in the world. Daniel's experience taught him that revenge is never worth it. He learned that there is more to life than winning at all costs and that true success comes from making a positive impact on the world. Lila had always been a sweet and caring person. She had a heart of gold and was always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. However, everything changed one fateful night when she was the victim of a brutal assault. Lila was walking home from a late-night shift at work when she was approached by a group of men. They demanded that she give them her purse, and when she refused, they attacked her. Lila was beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. When Lila woke up in the hospital, she was consumed by anger and bitterness. She felt like she had been wronged and that justice needed to be served. She vowed to find the men who had attacked her and make them pay. Lila spent the next several months working with the police to try and identify the men who had attacked her. She spent countless hours going through photo lineups and attending court hearings. Finally, the day came when Lila was able to identify her attackers. They were brought to trial, and Lila was able to testify against them. The men were found guilty and were sentenced to several years in prison. Lila felt a sense of relief and satisfaction knowing that her attackers were finally behind bars. But as time passed, she began to realize that revenge wasn't the answer. Lila realized that seeking revenge had consumed her life. She had spent so much time and energy trying to make her attackers pay that she had lost sight of the good in the world. She had become bitter and angry, and it had affected every aspect of her life. Lila made the decision to let go of her anger and bitterness. She realized that the only way to truly move on was to forgive her attackers and focus on the positive things in her life. Lila started volunteering at a local women's shelter, using her experience to help other women who had been through similar situations. She found that by helping others, she was able to find a sense of purpose and fulfillment that revenge could never provide. Lila's experience taught her that revenge is not the answer. While it may provide a temporary sense of satisfaction, it ultimately does more harm than good. True healing and happiness come from forgiveness and using our experiences to help others. Ever since he was a child, Jake had a tendency to hold grudges. He could never let go of a perceived wrong, and would often go to great lengths to seek revenge. One day, Jake's best friend, Matt, accidentally broke one of Jake's prized possessions. Jake was furious and demanded that Matt pay for it. When Matt refused, Jake vowed to get even. Jake spent weeks plotting his revenge. He wanted to make Matt suffer the same way he had suffered when his possession was broken. Finally, he came up with a plan. Jake knew that Matt was afraid of spiders, so he decided to fill Matt's room with them. He spent hours collecting spiders from the woods and placing them all over Matt's room. When Matt discovered the spiders, he was terrified. He immediately knew that Jake was behind it and was furious. He vowed to get revenge on Jake for what he had done. The two friends spent the next several weeks trying to outdo each other with pranks and revenge schemes. It became a never-ending cycle of retaliation, with neither one willing to back down. One day, Jake took things too far. He sabotaged Matt's car, causing a serious accident that left Matt in the hospital with several broken bones. Jake was arrested and charged with assault. As he sat in jail, he realized that his obsession with revenge had ruined his life. He had lost his friend and his freedom, all because he couldn't let go of a grudge. Jake realized that holding on to anger and seeking revenge was a toxic and destructive cycle. He made the decision to turn his life around and seek forgiveness from Matt. Matt, still recovering from his injuries, was hesitant to forgive Jake. But over time, he began to see that Jake was truly remorseful for what he had done. He decided to give Jake a second chance. Jake and Matt were able to mend their friendship, but the experience had taught them both a valuable lesson. Revenge is not the answer. It only leads to more pain and suffering. True happiness and fulfillment come from forgiveness and letting go of grudges. Lena had always been a peaceful person. She believed in forgiveness and compassion, even in the face of great injustice. But all of that changed when her brother, Mark, was brutally attacked and left blind. Mark had been walking home from work one night when a group of strangers jumped him, beating him so badly that he lost his sight. Lena was devastated. She couldn't believe that someone would do something so cruel to her brother. Determined to seek justice, Lena began to investigate the attack. She tracked down the culprits and confronted them, demanding that they take responsibility for their actions. But they refused, taunting her and laughing at her for being weak. Lena's anger and frustration grew with each passing day. She couldn't bear to see her brother suffer and knew that she had to do something to make the attackers pay for what they had done. One night, Lena snuck into the attackers' house and stole their prized possessions. She knew that they would be devastated by the loss of their possessions and hoped that it would make them feel even a fraction of the pain they had caused her brother. The attackers were furious when they discovered that their possessions had been stolen. They knew that Lena was behind it and decided to retaliate. They broke into Lena's house, vandalizing her property and stealing her belongings. Lena was outraged by their actions. She knew that she had started this cycle of revenge, but she couldn't bear to let the attackers get away with what they had done to her brother. Lena decided to take matters into her own hands. She tracked down the attackers and confronted them once again. This time, however, she was armed with a gun. The attackers were caught off guard by Lena's sudden aggression. They tried to defend themselves, but Lena was fueled by her anger and pain. She shot each of them in the leg, leaving them writhing in agony. Lena was arrested for her actions and charged with assault. As she sat in jail, she realized the toll that her obsession with revenge had taken on her life. She had lost everything, including her freedom, all because she couldn't let go of her anger and desire for revenge. In the end, Lena was able to find some semblance of peace by forgiving her brother's attackers and moving on with her life. She knew that her actions had been wrong, and vowed to never let her anger and thirst for revenge control her again. Julia had always been a strong-willed person. She didn't take kindly to those who wronged her, and she believed that justice should always be served. So when her boss, Mr. Thompson, accused her of stealing from the company, Julia was outraged. She knew that she was innocent, but Mr. Thompson refused to believe her. He fired her on the spot and told her that she would never find work in the industry again. Determined to clear her name, Julia began to investigate the theft. She soon discovered that Mr. Thompson had been stealing from the company himself and had been trying to frame her to cover his tracks. Julia was furious. Not only had Mr. Thompson falsely accused her, but he had also been the one committing the very crime he had accused her of. She knew that she had to make him pay for what he had done. Julia began to plot her revenge. She knew that she couldn't just let Mr. Thompson get away with his actions. She decided that she would steal something of equal value from him, just like he had stolen from the company. Julia waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. One night, she snuck into Mr. Thompson's office and stole his prized possession, a rare diamond ring that he had inherited from his grandfather. Mr. Thompson was devastated when he discovered that his ring had been stolen. He knew that Julia was behind it, but he couldn't prove anything. He decided to take matters into his own hands and broke into Julia's house, destroying her property and stealing her belongings. Julia was outraged by Mr. Thompson's actions. She knew that she had started this cycle of revenge, but she couldn't let him get away with what he had done to her. She decided to retaliate by stealing something even more valuable from him, his prized collection of vintage cars. Mr. Thompson was beside himself when he discovered that his cars had been stolen. He knew that Julia was behind it, but he had no way to prove it. He decided to confront her and demand that she return his possessions. Julia was ready for his confrontation. She knew that he would never believe that she was innocent, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. She confronted him with the evidence that she had gathered, showing him that he was the real thief and that she had only been seeking justice. Mr. Thompson was shocked by Julia's evidence. He couldn't believe that he had been caught. He apologized for his actions and offered to return everything that he had stolen. Julia accepted Mr. Thompson's apology, but she knew that she could never trust him again. She realized that her obsession with revenge had caused her to lose sight of what was truly important, justice and fairness. She vowed to never let her anger control her actions again and to always seek justice in a fair and just manner. Growing up, Tom had always been taught to stand up for himself. His parents had always told him that if someone hit him, he should hit them back. Twice as hard. Tom took this advice to heart and became known as a tough guy in his neighborhood. One day, Tom got into a fight with a boy named Dave. Dave had said something insulting to Tom, and Tom had reacted by punching him in the face. Dave fell to the ground and hit his head on the pavement, knocking him unconscious. Tom was scared. He had never hit someone so hard before, and he didn't know what to do. He quickly ran away, hoping that no one had seen what had happened. Days later, Dave woke up in the hospital. He had a severe concussion and a broken jaw. He was furious and wanted revenge. He knew that Tom had hit him and he vowed to get even. Dave began to plot his revenge. He knew that he couldn't just let Tom get away with what he had done. He decided that he would hit Tom twice as hard as Tom had hit him. Dave waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. One day, he saw Tom walking down the street alone. He approached him from behind and hit him over the head with a baseball bat, knocking him unconscious. Tom woke up in the hospital, with a severe concussion and a broken nose. He was shocked and angry. He couldn't believe that Dave had hit him like that. Tom knew that he had to get revenge. He didn't want to be seen as weak or as someone who could be taken advantage of. He began to plot his revenge, vowing to hit Dave twice as hard as Dave had hit him. Tom waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. One day, he saw Dave walking down the street alone. He approached him from behind and hit him over the head with a metal pipe, knocking him unconscious. Dave woke up in the hospital, with a severe concussion and a broken arm. He was devastated. He couldn't believe that Tom had hit him like that. Dave realized that the cycle of revenge had to stop. He knew that he had started it by seeking revenge for what Tom had done to him. He decided to break the cycle by apologizing to Tom and asking for forgiveness. Tom was surprised by Dave's apology. He had expected Dave to seek revenge for what he had done. He realized that he had been wrong to seek revenge himself and that forgiveness was the only way to end the cycle of violence. Tom accepted Dave's apology and they both vowed to put the past behind them. They realized that violence and revenge would only lead to more violence and pain. They chose to forgive each other and to move on, hoping that others would learn from their mistake and choose forgiveness over revenge. Samantha was an ambitious young woman who had just started her first job as a lawyer. She was determined to make a name for herself and worked tirelessly to prove herself to her boss and her colleagues. One day, Samantha's boss assigned her to a high-profile case. The case involved a man named John who had been accused of stealing from his employer. Samantha was determined to win the case and prove herself to her boss and her colleagues. Samantha worked hard on the case, spending long hours in the office and conducting interviews with witnesses. She was confident that she had a strong case against John and was ready to present her findings in court. On the day of the trial, Samantha presented her case to the judge and the jury. She argued that John had stolen from his employer and should be held accountable for his actions. The judge and the jury agreed and John was found guilty. John was devastated by the verdict. He had always maintained his innocence and couldn't believe that he had been found guilty. He vowed to get revenge on Samantha for what she had done to him. A few weeks later, Samantha was out for a jog in the park when she was attacked by a man. The man hit her in the face, knocking out one of her front teeth. Samantha was in shock and didn't know what to do. She went to the hospital and had her tooth replaced with a dental implant. Samantha was furious. She knew that John had been behind the attack and vowed to get revenge on him. She decided to file a lawsuit against him, seeking damages for her injury and the cost of her dental implant. The lawsuit dragged on for months, with both Samantha and John refusing to back down. They were both determined to win, no matter the cost. In the end, the judge ruled in favor of Samantha. John was ordered to pay for Samantha's dental implant and to pay her a large sum of money in damages. Samantha felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had won the case and had gotten her revenge on John. But as time went on, Samantha began to regret her decision to seek revenge. She realized that revenge had only caused her more pain and suffering. She had lost sight of what was important and had let her desire for revenge consume her. Samantha decided to reach out to John and offer him forgiveness. She knew that forgiveness was the only way to end the cycle of revenge and move on with her life. She wrote him a letter, expressing her regret for seeking revenge and her desire to move forward. John was surprised by Samantha's letter. He had expected her to continue seeking revenge against him, but he was grateful for her forgiveness and decided to accept it. Samantha and John were able to put the past behind them and move on with their lives. They realized that forgiveness was more powerful than revenge and that it was the only way to truly heal from their past hurts. Emily had always been a kind and gentle person. She had grown up in a small town and had always been surrounded by friends and family who loved her. But one day, everything changed. Emily's younger sister, Sarah, was attacked by a group of bullies on her way home from school. Sarah was left with a broken nose and a black eye. Emily was furious. She couldn't believe that anyone could be so cruel to her sister. She decided to take matters into her own hands and seek revenge on the bullies. Emily spent weeks planning her revenge. She stalked the bullies on social media and gathered information about their daily routines. She even went as far as to hire a private investigator to help her gather more information. Finally, the day of the revenge arrived. Emily had decided to confront the bullies at their school and teach them a lesson. She disguised herself and snuck onto the school campus. As she approached the bullies, Emily felt a sense of satisfaction. She was finally going to make them pay for what they had done to her sister. But things didn't go according to plan. One of the bullies recognized Emily and called out to her. Emily panicked and lashed out, hitting the bully in the face. The other bullies quickly joined in, and Emily found herself outnumbered and outmatched. She was hit in the face, leaving her with a black eye and a broken nose. Emily was taken to the hospital, where she was treated for her injuries. As she lay in bed, she realized the irony of the situation. She had sought revenge on the bullies for hurting her sister, but in the end, she had only hurt herself. Emily began to reevaluate her life and her values. She realized that revenge was never the answer and that violence only led to more violence. Emily decided to reach out to the bullies and offer them forgiveness. She knew that forgiveness was the only way to end the cycle of violence and move on with her life. To her surprise, the bullies accepted Emily's forgiveness and apologized for what they had done to her sister. They realized the error of their ways and vowed to change their behavior. Emily felt a sense of relief and peace knowing that she had done the right thing. She had learned a valuable lesson about the power of forgiveness and the danger of revenge. From that day on, she vowed to live her life with kindness and compassion towards others. Ben had always been a tough guy. He grew up in a rough neighborhood where violence was a way of life. He had seen and done things that most people couldn't even imagine. One day, Ben got into a fight with a rival gang member. It was a brutal fight, and both men ended up with injuries. Ben was left with a chipped tooth. Ben was furious. He knew that he couldn't let the other guy get away with it. He decided that he would get revenge and teach the other guy a lesson. Ben spent weeks planning his revenge. He tracked down the other guy's home and gathered information about his daily routine. He even went as far as to hire a group of thugs to help him carry out his plan. Finally, the day of the revenge arrived. Ben and his group of thugs stormed into the other guy's home, ready to teach him a lesson. They tied him up and began to beat him. But things didn't go according to plan. The other guy fought back with all his might, and the fight quickly turned into a brawl. In the chaos, Ben lost his balance and fell, hitting his head on a sharp edge. When Ben woke up, he was in the hospital. He had a severe head injury and was in critical condition. His family and friends rushed to his bedside, praying that he would pull through. As Ben lay in the hospital bed, he realized the folly of his actions. He had sought revenge on the other guy, but in the end, he had only hurt himself. Ben began to reevaluate his life and his values. He realized that violence was never the answer and that revenge only led to more violence. Ben decided to reach out to the other guy and offer him forgiveness. He knew that forgiveness was the only way to end the cycle of violence and move on with his life. To his surprise, the other guy accepted Ben's forgiveness and apologized for what he had done. He realized the error of his ways and vowed to change his behavior. Ben felt a sense of relief and peace knowing that he had done the right thing. He had learned a valuable lesson about the power of forgiveness and the danger of revenge. From that day on, he vowed to live his life with kindness and compassion towards others. Emily had always been a strong and independent woman. She had a successful career, a loving husband, and 2 beautiful children. Life seemed perfect, until one day, tragedy struck. Emily's husband was killed in a senseless act of violence. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the perpetrator had no remorse. Emily was devastated. She couldn't believe that her loving husband was gone, leaving her alone to raise their children. She was angry, bitter, and consumed by the desire for revenge. For months, Emily obsessed over getting revenge. She talked to lawyers, hired private investigators, and even considered taking matters into her own hands. She wanted the person responsible for her husband's death to pay for what they had done. But as time passed, Emily began to realize the futility of her anger. She knew that nothing could bring her husband back, and that revenge would only lead to more pain and suffering. Emily decided to take a different path. She reached out to a local charity that worked with victims of violence, and began volunteering her time and resources to help others in need. She also started a support group for other widows, offering them the comfort and understanding that she had desperately needed when her husband had died. Through her work with the charity and the support group, Emily found a sense of purpose and fulfillment. She realized that helping others was the best way to honor her husband's memory and to find peace in her own life. As time passed, Emily began to heal. She still missed her husband terribly, but she found solace in knowing that she was making a difference in the world. She had come to understand that forgiveness was the only way to move on from the pain of loss and to live a life filled with love and compassion. Emily's story is a powerful reminder of the transformative power of forgiveness. Even in the face of tragedy and loss, it is possible to find peace and purpose by choosing to live a life filled with kindness, love, and forgiveness. John had always been a hot-headed man. He was quick to anger and never one to back down from a fight. So when he found out that his business partner had stolen from him, he was ready to take action. John confronted his partner, demanding that he return the stolen money. But when the partner denied any wrongdoing, John flew into a rage. He punched the man in the face, knocking out one of his teeth. The partner was shocked and hurt, but John didn't care. He felt justified in his actions, believing that he had simply given the man what he deserved. But the situation quickly spiraled out of control. The partner filed charges against John for assault, and John found himself facing jail time. As he sat in his cell, John began to reflect on his life and his actions. He realized that his anger had gotten the best of him, and that he had hurt someone he once considered a friend. John also came to understand the true meaning of the phrase, "a tooth for a tooth." He had believed that by taking the partner's tooth, he was getting even for the stolen money. But in reality, he had only caused more pain and suffering for both himself and the partner. As John sat in jail, he began to work on himself. He attended anger management classes, read books on forgiveness and compassion, and even started volunteering at a local homeless shelter. Through his time in jail and his work on himself, John learned the importance of forgiveness and empathy. He realized that revenge was never the answer, and that the only way to truly move on from a situation was to let go of anger and focus on healing. When John was released from jail, he sought out his former business partner to apologize for his actions. He asked for forgiveness and promised to make amends for the harm he had caused. To his surprise, the partner forgave him. He too had come to understand the importance of forgiveness and had moved on from the situation. John's story is a powerful reminder that revenge is never the answer. When we let go of our anger and focus on forgiveness and healing, we can find peace and happiness in our lives, and build stronger, more compassionate relationships with others. Michael had always been a man of principle. He believed that justice must be served, and that those who committed crimes must be punished accordingly. So when his son was killed in a hit-and-run accident, Michael was devastated. He couldn't understand why someone would be so reckless and careless with another person's life. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, Michael's grief turned to anger. He wanted the driver who killed his son to pay for what they had done. Michael began to investigate the accident, searching for any clues that could lead him to the driver. He spent hours poring over security camera footage, interviewing witnesses, and tracking down leads. Finally, he found the driver responsible. The man had been drinking and driving at the time of the accident, and had fled the scene in a panic. Michael felt a surge of anger and satisfaction. He had found the person responsible for his son's death, and now it was time for justice to be served. But as he prepared to testify in court, Michael began to have second thoughts. He realized that taking revenge wouldn't bring his son back, and that violence only begets more violence. Michael started to think about the consequences of his actions. What if the driver had a family who loved him? What if he was a good person who made a terrible mistake? Michael realized that his desire for revenge was clouding his judgment. He knew that he had to find a better way to deal with his grief and anger. So Michael made the difficult decision to forgive the driver. He spoke at his trial, urging the judge to show mercy and leniency. He even reached out to the driver's family, expressing his condolences and forgiveness. In the end, the driver received a lighter sentence than Michael had hoped for. But Michael knew that he had done the right thing. By forgiving the driver, he had found a way to move on from his grief and anger, and had shown the power of compassion and forgiveness. Michael's story is a powerful reminder that forgiveness can be a powerful tool for healing and moving forward. When we let go of our desire for revenge and focus on compassion and understanding, we can find peace and happiness in our lives, and build stronger, more compassionate relationships with others. Samantha had always been a hard worker. She had built her own business from scratch, pouring countless hours and endless energy into making it a success. So when her biggest competitor, John, started to steal her clients and undercut her prices, Samantha was furious. She couldn't believe that he would resort to such underhanded tactics to try and put her out of business. But instead of giving up, Samantha decided to fight back. She began to offer even lower prices, and worked to improve her services and customer satisfaction. Despite her efforts, John continued to steal her clients. Samantha started to feel like she was fighting a losing battle. One day, Samantha discovered that John had been spreading rumors about her business, claiming that her services were subpar and that she was unreliable. Samantha was livid. She knew that she couldn't let John get away with such slanderous behavior. So she started to spread rumors about his business in retaliation. The situation quickly escalated, with both Samantha and John spreading increasingly vicious rumors about each other's businesses. They started to sabotage each other's operations, and engage in other underhanded tactics to try and gain the upper hand. But as the feud continued, Samantha started to feel drained and unhappy. She realized that her desire for revenge was consuming her, and that the feud was taking a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. Samantha realized that she needed to find a way to move on from the feud and focus on building her own business, instead of tearing down John's. She reached out to John, and they agreed to meet and try to find a way to resolve their conflict. At the meeting, they talked openly and honestly about their grievances and frustrations. They were able to find common ground, and agreed to put the past behind them and start fresh. Samantha and John ended up forming a partnership, working together to grow both of their businesses. They were able to learn from each other's strengths and weaknesses, and build a stronger, more successful business as a result. Samantha's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with conflict and competition is through collaboration and cooperation. When we focus on building relationships and working together, instead of tearing each other down, we can achieve great things and create positive change in the world. Anna had always been a law-abiding citizen. She believed in justice and the importance of following the rules. But one day, everything changed. Anna's sister, Maria, was brutally attacked and left for dead. The attacker was never caught, and Anna was left with a burning desire for revenge. As time went on, Anna became consumed with thoughts of vengeance. She couldn't shake the anger and bitterness that had taken hold of her, and she began to obsess over finding the person responsible for her sister's attack. Anna's quest for revenge took over her life. She quit her job and spent all of her time and resources tracking down leads and searching for clues. She became increasingly reckless, putting herself in danger and taking risks that she would never have taken before. Despite her best efforts, Anna was unable to find the attacker. As time went on, she began to feel defeated and hopeless. One day, Anna stumbled upon a support group for victims of violent crimes. She attended a meeting, and was struck by the stories of others who had suffered similar traumas. As Anna listened to the stories of others, she began to see that revenge was not the answer. She realized that her quest for revenge had consumed her life, and that it had not brought her any closer to finding peace or closure. Anna decided to let go of her anger and bitterness, and focus on healing and moving forward. She started to volunteer at the support group, offering comfort and encouragement to others who had been through similar experiences. Through her work with the support group, Anna found a sense of purpose and meaning. She realized that her experiences had given her a unique perspective, and that she could use her knowledge and compassion to help others. Anna's story is a powerful reminder that while revenge may feel satisfying in the moment, it rarely brings lasting happiness or peace. Sometimes, the best way to find closure and healing is by letting go of anger and bitterness, and focusing on helping others.